It's so nice to see so many of my friends, young and less young than those ones, here today. And I'm delighted to tell you a story. Some times are like other times, and other times are like no time at all. And this time was like no other time, except maybe a little like this time, a time of returning, when Miu grew to manhood in the great and glorious city that sits north of the Lake Beautiful and sparkles under the light of the summer sun, which is a very long name for a city. But it was a very great and glorious city, and it certainly did sparkle in the summer sun. And this story takes place in a time and space when people found it important to use names that accurately described things. When Miu was a boy, every summer his family would travel down to the river Delta, following the river that ran swiftly south from the Lake Beautiful to the sea, and spend some time in a small fishing village, which was called the village where the rustling river trout swim, the sea waves shine by dawn, and the breeze sings only of peace, which was a ridiculously long name for a very little village, but accurate names. These were beautiful days for Miu in his childhood, and he would run free, barefoot and wild. He would take a boat out on the shining waves of the sea, and it seemed like the waves went on forever. He would join the fishermen to catch the rustling river trout, and the trout would jump right into his net, and his father would cook tasty trout for dinner. He would bask on the hillside and listen to the breeze, lulled to sleep by its song of peace. It was Miu's favorite place to be, and he waited all year to return to the village. But Miu grew older, and there was work to be done in the great and glorious city that sits north of Lake Beautiful and sparkles under the light of the summer sun. So by the time this story takes place, he had not returned to the village where the rustling river trout swim, etc., etc., in a very long time. But this summer, no different from any other summer, Miu was going to leave the great and glorious city and travel along the river that runs swiftly south from Lake Beautiful to visit the village with his daughter, Yumi. Yumi was very excited, and she talked the whole way about how she would take a boat out on the shining waves just like her dad did, and she would let the river trout jump into her net just like her dad did, and she would sleep on the hillside lulled by the breeze just as her father had always told her he had done. And Miu himself was very excited to return to the place of his youth and do all the things he once had done and show them to Yumi. On the first day, they took a boat out onto the shining sea so that they could sail in the endless waters. And Yumi gazed out across the sea and felt the rocking of the boat and said, "You're right, Daddy, you're right. The waves go on forever." But Miu was troubled. The sea didn't look to him the way he remembered it. The waves did not go on forever. In fact, he was reasonably sure he could see the far banks through the mist. When Yumi and he arrived back home in the evening, he asked a villager, "Has the sea grown smaller since I was a boy?" And the villager laughed. "The sea is now as it ever was, but you've grown up since then." On the second day, Miu and his daughter Yumi joined the fishermen as they stood in the river that runs swiftly south from Lake Beautiful to catch the rustling river trout. And Yumi could not stop laughing and smiling as the fish jumped straight into her net. But no trout jumped into Miu's net, as they were for Yumi, or they had when he was a boy. In fact, he had to work very hard to catch any of them. And as he looked closer at the fishermen, he noticed that they were catching the trout and tossing them into Yumi's net when she wasn't looking. And Yumi would get excited about the fish she'd caught, and the fishermen would smile, and they would wink at each other. As they packed up their catch for the day, Miu asked one of the fishermen, "Have the fish grown faster and harder to catch since I was a boy?" And the fisherman laughed and said, "The trout are now as they ever were, but you've grown up since then." After a dinner of tasty trout, Miu and Yumi went out to the hillside and listened to the breeze sing its song of silence and peace. And Yumi smiled and cuddled into Miu's side. "It's just like you always told me," she said, and drifted off to sleep, protected by her father's arm. But Miu couldn't sleep. He thought about the sea and the waves. He thought about the fish and the fishermen. He thought about the sunny spot on a hill and how it used to feel like the days would last forever and there was not one concern in the world. And he thought about Yumi, suntanned and happy, curled trustingly into his side. Has the world grown harder since I was a boy? He asked nobody at all. And the breeze that formerly sang only of silence raised its voice and laughed. The world is now as it ever was, but you have grown up since then. And the breeze sang of possibilities that seem endless when you don't really understand endings, of the confidence that comes when others are helping and supporting you to succeed, of the peace that comes by being loved and protected. And Miu cried for what he would never get back. But the breeze only laughed again and kept singing. The breeze sang of the joys that come when you can finally see the edges of your dreams, the camaraderie of fishermen who laugh as they help children catch the rustling river trout, and the very tastiness of the trout that you have cooked to feed and sustain the people you love. And it sang as it rustled over Yumi's hair, and as it brushed over her cheek, as she slept on in perfect peace, loved and protected. When their time in the village was over, Miu and Yumi packed up their bags and began the long walk north along the river that flows swiftly south from Lake Beautiful to the sea. As the great and glorious city began to appear on the horizon, Yumi said to her father, "That was the best summer of my whole life. It was exactly like you told me it was. Was it exactly like you remember it, Daddy? Was it?" And Miu thought for a moment, and then he ruffled the top of Yumi's head like a breeze. "It's the same as it ever was," he told her. And he laughed, thinking about other fathers and other daughters and other mothers and other sons who would all return to the places they had been and discover that they had become the people they had become in a time not unlike this time, in a world not far from now.